Hello, and you're very welcome to an Irish League podcast called Kicking Match. My name is Peter Cinnamon, and if you'll have me, you can enjoy episodes with me just like this every single week, even during weeks like this. Not your usual fare. We had 8 cup games of action to hopefully keep us away from, I don't know, having a hook grind easy living for an afternoon or something. But a bit like always, it's the things happening off the pitch which seems to keep us more hooked than a Happy Valley cliffhanger. Don't worry, no spoilers here, but I will tell you what's in store for what is not the final episode of this show. We're chatting financial stability of teams in our league. Are some clubs not learning from the mistakes of the past, or are they in fact ready to front up and take on the hard decisions? We're going to review all those cup games I was talking about and look ahead for what's in store for another weekend of Niffle Irish League Premiership action. Great week if you enjoy some cup chaos and big loopy pelters. It was a weekend of booting the ball high regardless if it went in or even close to the goal or not. You know the drill by now. I've got a highly knowledgeable friend who said to join me to talk Irish League things, and this week it is a doozy, story breaker, sports journalist, mover and shaker for the Sun. It's time for the return of the one and only Mark McIntosh.
How are you, mate?
I am doing very well. I'm currently going through, by accident, your old stomping ground. I'm going through a social club gambit. I've went from Keith to Stephen back to you. I'm getting all those people that love those podcasts, get them all nostalgic again. I'm teasing like a reunion, you know. I've got both the Oasis brothers on, and you guys are kind of the equivalent of that for Irish League podcasting.
I'll have to get Holty on the phone to see if he's available then.
100%. Get little James on as well. Can have the whole big crew. This week in particular, a bit of cup stuff, a bit of things going on off the pitch. Just feels like peak social club. This is exactly the type of things you guys would dive into. And look, we had a fun last round of 16 in the Irish Cup as we head towards the later part of the season. It really does feel as though we're galloping towards the end now. But the thing that really piqued my interest, got a lot of stories and headlines. We go straight to Ballymena and a story reported in the Belfast Telegraph by Graham Lunny, how Ballymena have had meetings within the board where they are now potentially looking at cost cutting and a drive to help weather what Lunny describes as a financial storm. Now, many months ago, I was talking to Keith on the podcast about this idea, how we're in this new era. We're in the part full-time era where we're seeing some of the big teams at the top of the league going full-time, and about all the positives people like to talk about when it comes to that. And one of the concerns Keith brought up is how other clubs react to that. How will they try to compete or decide what way they set themselves up to try and get into the top 6, to try and get them towards those European places? For Ballymena, they have had a great amount of success over the past few years. They were in the cup final last season. They have been qualifying for Europe. But now it looks as though they're having to cut their cloth. When you read this, did you see it as a concerning bit of news? Were you surprised by it?
I wasn't surprised, if I'm being honest. You know, I think maybe we've all read a few rumours in the days building up to that. I don't think it was a massive story in terms of, you know, the end is close for Ballymena United. I don't think it was anything like that. I think they're just being prudent. They know that they have to cut their cloth, and I think they certainly won't be the only club doing that. And any club in that bottom 6 who aren't looking at it that way, I think could be in for very dark days in the future, because the biggest problem in our league right now is that we have a part-time league paying full-time wages. And when you're in the bottom 6, you're chasing the dream. And I understand football is a business like no other. You know, you wouldn't run your own company the way clubs are run. And that's always going to be a problem. And when clubs are chasing that dream, they're trying to sign players that maybe don't deserve the contracts that they eventually get. You're always going to run into problems. And I think for Ballymena, you know, they had a couple of years in Europe, which obviously brought good money. They got a good fee for Shea McCartan. They've obviously sold Adam Leckie in the not-so-distant past. So they were maybe used to spending a bit more money than they did before. but they haven't had Europe now, and they're not selling those players. So it seems perfect sense to cut their cloth that way. And when they talked about bringing in revenue streams, look, the full time clubs have to do that too. Larne are a great example. Larne were never just going to be reliant on Kenny Bruce's checkbook. That would have been crazy. They had to find other ways to make the club self sustainable. Now, clubs in the bottom six aren't going to be able to do that in the same way. But I certainly think there's a lot more clubs can be doing to try and be self sustainable in some way.
One way to look at this is Ballymena fronting up to the situation they potentially see moving forward. You're absolutely right. I want to highlight this is not some sort of prelude to a doomsday scenario. This is Ballymena addressing something that they see coming down the line. And when it comes to other clubs, the questions will be, how are other clubs dealing with this new scenario? You talk about some of the wages being handed out, and I want to reflect on comments made in an interview done by the Glenavon media team, the More View Monthly. It was an interview with Glenavon chairman Adrian Teer. A brilliant interview. If you are a fan of the Irish League, if you're listening to this podcast, I think this interview will be right down your alley, be it you're a Glenavon fan or not. Adrian stood up, took on questions of a tone that you wouldn't usually see being given out by an own club's media team. He addressed a lot of questions about where the club's currently sitting, what they're looking to do in the future, and he also answered some questions in regards to where the league is at. And when asked, did he believe there was a danger that clubs could be chasing some of the full-time teams and there were potentially at risk at overspending? Flat out said, and I quote, "This is happening." At least from his perspective, he looks out there in the league and he believes that other clubs are potentially living beyond their means to try and compete. One thing to reflect on here is history. We look at this league, and particularly over the past 20, 30 years, when I think of financial issues and financial drama, I often point and look towards the League of Ireland, the stories of Fingal, the stories of Cork getting wound up, Shelbourne and the drama they went through. Like, they were big clubs doing big things. The Fingal thing's a very different story amongst there, but even locally, and it's a different era, but it's still very relevant. We've seen Ards selling their ground and never really recovering. Coleraine in the early 2000s. Nesbitt coming in, the £1.3 million of debt that they had. And even we look around, a club that's been able to turn themselves around, Newry. This is Newry AFC because they got wound up in 2012. We have seen teams go down this road before. And I wonder, are we seeing any signs potentially around the league that some clubs haven't heeded those warnings?
Yeah, I mean, and let's not forget Glentoran. The padlocks were on the gates at Glentoran before Ali Poor came in, and it just shows you if it can happen to Glentoran, it could happen to anyone. Look, I do think that there's an issue with clubs in that, a lot of clubs sometimes just bury their head in the sand, and supporters obviously put a lot of pressure on clubs because they want success. And while some supporters will say that, they want answers from the clubs, sometimes they're not that interested in the answer. I've found that a lot down the years because we're all fans of clubs. We just want them to be successful. That's kind of our job as a fan. But I think the time is probably right now for clubs to be more open and honest about where they're at right now, where they want to get to and how they're going to get there. And I welcome what Ballymena have said, and you're 100% right about Adrian Teer's interview. It was refreshing for an in-house media to pose the questions that maybe were a little bit uncomfortable. Now, the cynic in me, of course, will say it was very well briefed beforehand and all of that. Like, that's neither here nor there. Adrian gave some very good answers, and I think he explained why Glenavon aren't going out and just signing the best striker they can find or the best creative midfielder they can find, because there's just no value in it for them long term. And Glenavon fans, obviously, in recent times haven't been too happy with Gary Hamilton. And, I think every fan can identify with what's going on. We've all been there at our clubs at some stage. Gary Hamilton, Adrian Teer and that Glenavon board, they have to have the interests of that club, not just this season. It would have been crazy for them to fork out money that they don't necessarily have. And there's so much more that goes into it. And I think Adrian sort of described it quite well about, talking about maybe one player that they were trying to sign who was maybe just trying to use them a little bit before going to another club. These are all the sorts of things that happen, and these are the things the fans don't see. And I think if chairman or somebody at the club was more upfront about these things more often, I think we'd be in a better place.
It was very unique, this interview as well. I think you're right. There was clearly things he wanted to say. This was a very much a I'm backing Gary, I'm backing my manager statement there, which he has every right to do. And he talked about transfers in January because he said that they made a list, that they went through everybody in the top three divisions here. They looked a bit down south. They have taken a lot of players from lower divisions in the Republic of Ireland. And they say they built up a list that they could bring in, that'd be affordable, that would also improve their team. And to quote, he said it was a frighteningly small number of players they were able to identify. So that kind of says we're a club like Glenavon, who were up second, third only a couple of years ago, have had an incredible decade of success. And perhaps sometimes it's hard to, as a fan, to refigure exactly where you are. In other big American sports, teams talk about being in transition and rebuilds. And sometimes in football, you always feel as though you're maybe one or two or three players away from really going for it. And a team like Glenavon sometimes might need to poise and stand still, because right now, at least in my, what you probably say, short period of time that I've been following the league, I've never seen it more in flux. I've never seen things change and move in the way they have. Transfer fees seemed like a fantasy and a dream 6, 7, 10 years ago. And now we're seeing a club in the championship pay a fee for a striker from one of the top teams. Now, that's a very unique situation, but I just do not think you would have seen the Nenis Makalitis transfer to Carrick Rangers where a fee is paid this time 5 years ago. It's a different era, and I don't know if we've fully found our footing yet. Is this the new normal, or is this a very strange time in our league's history?
I think it's a bit of a strange time because the part-time clubs are trying to find ways to stay competitive in some shape or form. The easiest way of doing that is to spend money, or the easiest way they can see of doing that is spending money. That's not always the right answer. In fact, most of the time it's not the right answer. And you're right, some of the transfer fees are frightening. I'm old enough to remember I was working when Glenn Ferguson left Glenavon to go to Linfield for £55,000. And, I never thought that fee would be beaten. And then obviously we've had, Lee Bonus and Shea McCartan in more recent times kind of blew that completely out of the water. But some of the money exchanging hands, look, as a journalist, you hear lots of stories about what players are getting a week, and it would frighten you. And it goes back to what I said at the start of the show, Peter. We're a part-time league paying full-time wages. I just don't see how that is sustainable anywhere. And, if you're a club that gets lots of people through the turnstiles, then you give yourself a chance. But if you look at clubs like Carrick, Dungannon, Glenavon, certainly, because their crowds haven't been good this season, I just don't see how that would be sustainable. And clubs will chase the dream. I keep saying that is what they do. But there has to be some grown-up thinking now. There really does. And a lot of people gave Jared Lawler a bit of stick for a part of an interview that was played on the BBC website just before Christmas, when he spoke about the league being full-time within 5 years or possibly to 10 years. And I think it was taken completely out of context. He was talking about aspirationally where he wants our league to be, and I think we can all agree with him on that one. But there's a lot of things that need to be in place before that happens. The league and the Irish FA probably have to do some things to show clubs what they can do, and how can the league help the clubs to help themselves. You have to look at maybe the people involved in clubs. I remember years ago, boards would have been made up either of people with a massive checkbook or people with individual qualities. And they were brought on, it might be someone that knew something about architecture, something that helped with stadium, things like that. And I just think because Irish League football being the mainly part-time league it is, a lot of people running football clubs are volunteers. And when that happens, you're going to have mistakes. You're going to have people thinking with a fan's mind at times. And that, whilst that's great and we all love the passion of that, it's not good for the club as a whole. And, I do fear that if clubs continue to spend the way we're all hearing that they're spending, then there could be some very difficult times. And I go back to it. That's why I think it's good what Glenavon are doing. Certainly good to be upfront about it. And I think how Ballymena have handled the situation with them, I applaud them for it because they couldn't keep doing it the way they were doing it, and something has to change. And if you're going to improve and you're going to grow, you have to have the proper foundations first.
Well, I think it's only fair to Ballymena that I reference a statement they made in regards to reports made in the Belfast Telegraph titled Unverified Sources. Ballymena United are aware of various rumours circling, citing, and I quote, unverified sources about the future of the club, emergency meetings, and paying wages. They say in the statement pretty much that they have been upfront in regards to their change in board, who's on there, and they say very openly here that no player was pushed out of the door in January, but as a business, we were open to listen to offers being made for players who moved on. Again, no emergencies, but we have to be realistic moving forward that we are trying to maintain a part-time football club in a league of increasingly full-time clubs. Players that left in January are Conor Keeley to Drogheda for work-related reasons. We saw Paul McElroy go to Portadown with a fee. Kieran Loughran moved on. David Parkhouse moved on loan. And at the start of this season, probably when I was talking to yourself, we were talking about where clubs could be, where Ballymena could finish. And if Ballymena were sitting here in the top six with a chance of Europe and they could go on a cup run, perhaps their budget makes sense. But right now, it's clear they're not going to finish top six. And a lot of these changes will come at the end of the season. Europe pending, all those type of things. Right now, it's very hard for a club to really figure out what their budget's going to be next season. But clearly, Ballymena are shimming things around and are trying to change it up for them. And just to reflect on some of the stories that have been going on before, I don't want to directly connect this to Ballymena at all, but Omatown are our team that went bust for a variety of reasons. I would highly recommend people go out and check out an article written by Lewis Bennett, who wrote a really nice reflective piece on the history of that club. Like I said, Ards had to sell their ground. Red Card Summer. I know people keep listening to that podcast weekly. Keith does pretty much everything you need to know about the history of Ards when it comes to selling the ground and where they are and where they're going forward. Coleraine pretty much had to be liquidated and still stayed in the league. Well, accounts, they were liquidated in 2006, stuck around. The Flynn thing in regards to Newry City, but they pretty much had to be wound up in a Belfast court and had to start all the way from the bottom again. And it's not just paying wages. Bangor in 2016 were threatened with a winding up order based on money being paid to that 3G pitch that they have there. So it's not always just the boring things. And the reason why I bring up League of Ireland is because they are a league who in the past 20 years have went through this process of trying to go full time. And they had a few teething issues, mainly to do with the whole crash in 2007 had a big factor, but Cork City is a team who was wound up in 2009. They go down, they go up, and then again they have more issues only a few years ago and are only getting back up into the top league there after winning it in 2017. They fall back down, and the Shelbourne thing, they've never really recovered after winning the league, having such an incredible run down in the Republic of Ireland, winning the league numerous times, getting on that brilliant run to the third qualifying round of the Champions League, and it was 2004. As you alluded to, any club could be here, and you just don't know if it takes one person that's putting money into the club. And for now, as a fan, I think it's about being vigilant and also listening to what the club is saying. But there's only a certain amount of people at each club who are making the decisions. And we talk about that interview with Adrian Teer. He reflects on the idea of going full time. He pretty much says he cannot see it happening in at least the short term future.
And I totally understand that. And there'll be a lot of chairmen exactly like Adrian. That doesn't mean you don't aspire to something. And that's why you have to start somewhere. And it's interesting you bring up the League of Ireland clubs, and you're 100% right in what you were saying. But there's so many times I hear people say, look at what the League of Ireland clubs are doing. Why can't we do that? Why can't we be more professional like them? I would flip that and say, let's learn from their
You're
mistakes
absolutely right.
because there were some horrendous mistakes made. And if Irish League clubs, if that's a starting place for Irish League clubs to look at the mistakes that have been made elsewhere, then I think we're instantly in a better place. Now you have to then act upon that. And I'm not saying clubs should just settle for where they are. And to use Ballymena and Glenavon as the example, they know at the start of the season they were fighting for seventh place. That still gives them the chance of Europe, that gets them into the playoff, still gives them that glimmer of hope. But the best they could probably hope for, other than a cup run, was to finish seventh. Now, I'm not saying you sit on your hands and go, right, well, that's the best we can hope for, so good luck to us. You have to find other ways, and other ways will be there. And that's why, I applaud Ballymena. They can see what was possibly coming down the line. So they're getting their house in order. That's exactly what any decent club should be doing, any reasonably run club. And, a lot of fans will be upset by it or annoyed by it and think that the club's going backwards. To me, it certainly isn't that. It's the opposite. That's ensuring they have a club that can flourish. Now, it's up to the people involved in the club to find ways of doing that. But wouldn't it be great to see more fans get involved in some shape or form? There are a lot of clubs, and I have to say, like Portadown, some of the initiatives they do, I think their fans get involved. And again, I think some of the so-called bigger clubs in Portadown could learn a lot from that. And there's other things going on within the league that are very good and very positive. But there's also things like sponsorship. Sponsorship years ago, when I think about it, obviously there was more money available in the world probably then. But, sponsorship deals now are minuscule compared to what they used to be. And we're certainly at a time when I think we all agree our league is on the up. Show me a more exciting league in Europe, and I'll call you a liar. I just think there's so many opportunities that are untapped. And, I don't even believe I'm going to say this because I certainly wouldn't be a fan of going to watch the Belfast Giants. But one of the things that really struck me about the Belfast Giants, when I've gone occasionally down the years, they make it an event. And Irish League clubs have never really tapped into that. It's always been a case of 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. You go there, you get your burger, you shout abuse at the referee, you go home happy or raging. That's it. Surely there's more can be done. And I've seen it with clubs. I know Portadown have done Oktoberfest themed things in the past. I know Glentoran have done certain things in the forecourt of the car park when they're not protesting. They actually do some really good things. And there's lots of things. And I think if you can make an Irish League game a bit of an event, you might attract a whole new level, like a whole new population of people that, maybe never turned on to the Irish League, never took any interest in it, but they might hear something they might like. Because let's be honest, when the Belfast Giants came to Northern Ireland, Belfast wasn't really a hotbed for ice hockey, and they're still getting massive crowds at the SSE. So they're doing something right. And again, why not look at what the Belfast Giants are doing? Why not look at what Ulster Rugby are doing or the GAA? And look, not all of it will fit for the Irish League, but some of it might. Why not do that?
Are we too married? Are we too nostalgic and tied to tradition, potentially within circles within the league? You are talking about new ideas and new concepts. I don't think generally, I think there's a new breed of people who are pushing new ideas, but I think it's fair to say that from my time watching the league, there has been a lot of resistance to change. And I think that should be reflected. I'm not saying it's there right now, but do you think that we are potentially in an era where there's new thinking where we could see more change than in previous times?
Well, you might not say it. I'll definitely say it. We're very much still there, and you only have to look at Mick McDermott, and Mick divides opinion. We all know that. But Mick McDermott started a lot of conversations that people were uneasy having for years. And whether you like or dislike Mick, he got the conversations going. And I think in that sense, he was very positive for this league. Now, I didn't agree with everything that he was saying in terms of ideas, but we need more people who aren't just completely entrenched in what our league has always been. We need forward thinkers, and that's why someone like Kenny Bruce has been a breath of fresh air, and it's not all about his money. There are other things, and that, Lauren, again, a good example of getting other people involved in the club, and, the club's totally unrecognizable, and I don't think that is purely down to the money, and there are a lot of clubs that instantly say no to summer football. We can't do that. We play our league when we play it, and that's it. Some clubs still don't want to play on Friday nights or Sundays, and that's what we're up against. I think we have to try and change some of that. I'm not saying it's going to work for every club to do things completely different from what they've always done, but there has to be a bit of leeway, maybe, that it doesn't always suit people what used to be the perfect case for Irish League football. There has to be more involved in it now. There has to be more forward thinking. And again, someone divides opinion as Gerard Lawler, the chief executive at NIFL. I think Gerard's been a breath of fresh air since he came into NIFL. He thinks outside the box. Again, let's look at the League Cup final last year. A lot of eyebrows were raised when that was played on a Sunday. It was a roaring success. Now, they were obviously helped because it was a cracking game as well, but it was a roaring success. And I think until we start thinking outside the box occasionally or trying some things, and you know what? See if they fail, then we know. Let's try it. Don't put your club at risk for no apparent reason, but let's try different things. And if they work, you might just surprise yourself.
I'm not going to dive into this whole quagmire of every Irish League issue and thought, but just to put this out there from a man like yourself who's reported on the league for so many years and know a lot of highly influential people within the league. I don't think the 12-team league's going anywhere. I think that's probably the right number. And I look at, when we talk about League of Ireland teams, obviously everybody brings up, potential of an All-Ireland League. But realistically, it feels as though summer football or some version of it we're probably closer to. When you have the GM of Linfield coming out and saying summer football, paraphrasing here, has to happen, and there's other big characters where it feels as though Glentoran's pro, Kenny Bruce is a big proponent of it. How far away are we from at least some type of change? And what, if I was to say broadly, is there a percentage of clubs that you would be confident enough to say this percentage of the league would go for summer football tomorrow?
I would have said
how split are we?
I would have said a couple of years ago that the majority of clubs would not have been in favour of summer football. I think a lot has changed in recent years. You mentioned David Graham there, Pat Fenlon before him as well. Certainly would have said summer football was the way to go. I think a lot of clubs, and I don't really like using this phrase, but influential clubs, they're all supposed to be equal, but sometimes it doesn't work out like that. And I think when Lynn
clearly
raise their head and say, okay, summer football, let's talk, I think we're much closer than we've ever been at any stage. But at the same time, I don't think we're particularly close to it. I still think we're a number of years away before we can bring everybody with us. Now, whether you would be big enough to try and make that leap, even if you can't bring some clubs with you, I don't really think we're in a position where we can do that. But I would certainly say we're closer now than we have ever been in my lifetime. A lot closer. But the one warning I would say, we couldn't just have summer football for one season. You would have to do it for maybe 3 seasons and see where it goes, because obviously there would be a novelty to it and all of that, and that maybe distorts what could happen in the future. So I think you would have to maybe do it for 3 years. But I'm certainly a big fan of saying, do you know what? Let's try it. Let's try it. Let's get rid of the conversation once and for all.
Is there a baby steps way of doing it where if it was to go ahead, is there, let's say it's a 3-year trial, is there a way of moving it slightly and then getting to the ideal and maybe moving, shifting it back and forward, kind of trying what works for the league and what the clubs feel comfortable with? Or is it a right decisions made, rip it up, we're starting here, might feel a bit odd, but that's the way it's going to go? Is there an in between it all that can be tried or at least tested?
I think the in between would be difficult. The only in between you can look at is um, the months you play. So you could say it's not identical to the League of Ireland, or what do we do? Do we try and fit the Boxing Day fixtures in? Because that's obviously a big thing for clubs. It's a massive thing for fans, obviously, as well. And I don't think anyone particularly wants to see the Boxing Day fixtures go. But at the same time, that the Boxing Day fixtures had to start at some stage. This wasn't just always a thing. So, something can grow, but clubs have to be brave. And I just think sometimes they're not willing to do that. Whether that's down to the fact they don't want change, or whether it's simply they don't think it would work out, they don't think it's good for their club. And, first and foremost, they have to look after their own club before they're looking after the league. I think that's totally understandable and the right way. I don't think you would just say the turn of the year, it's January, from next season we're starting a winter or a summer league. That's not going to happen. This has to be in the pipeline for a few years. Let's do proper work on it and let's see what it would take for it to change. And again, I keep saying it, let's have grown-up conversations and not just the simple conversations of, no, our league's always been like this, it works like this, and that's the end of the conversation.
Because quickly, the format, the way the League of Ireland did the jump is that it ended and then it pretty much started quite quickly again. It was the 2002-2003 and then 2003 season kind of just happened quite quickly afterwards. Just that's the way they did it.
Yeah, but that sort of thing, that's what I mean. That would have been in the planning for a couple of years. So clubs would,
years, yeah.
They would have got things sorted in the build up to that. So you couldn't just do it at a couple of months' notice. I mean, that's complete nonsense. You couldn't do that. But I just think it's for our league to grow, we're all enjoying what this league is, but for it to grow properly, I think it's the one thing that we have to try. And at the same time, look, I understand it why some clubs would be totally against it. I totally understand that. But we will never know until we try. And I personally, I'm not comfortable with going, well, what might have been.
We'll move to things that happened on the pitch over the weekend. It was the 6th round, last 16 in the Irish Cup. Let's start one of the big ones at a windy and rainy Inver Park. Linfield lose on penalties again for the 3rd time this season. 2nd time against Larne. Of course they are lottery, but Linfield in a big game, they were away. But once again, they don't get it done when the pressure was on and the stakes were high.
Yeah, it was a difficult afternoon for Linfield. Linfield went 1-0 up just before half-time, and they were by no means particularly in the game. What I will say, as much as Larne were controlling the game, Chris Johns didn't have a save to make. I have to say that. But I think for any Linfield fan, you would think going to Inver Park, you're never overly confident. Linfield don't have a good record there. Obviously, they lost in the Irish Cup last year as well. And, even speaking to a few Blue men before the game, there weren't too many of them overly confident. It went to penalties. Larne scored their equaliser. Again, neither keeper really had too many saves to make. When it went to penalties, unfortunately, at the minute with Linfield, you just never fancied them. Now, I did think before the penalty shootout, I looked back to the RFS one and, everyone was so dejected before that penalty shootout started. I don't think Linfield ever stood a chance.
Not a hope. No, you're absolutely right.
And then even if you look back to the County Antrim Shield final, you had everyone was so nervous and worried about David Walsh after that horrific injury. So again, maybe heads were elsewhere. I can understand that. Sometimes everyone talks about momentum in football, and once you start winning games, you get used to winning. I think it works the other way too. If you've lost a few penalty shootouts in a row, you kind of get used to losing them. And it's a difficult habit to shift. And I think, Chris Shields, who's been Linfield's penalty taker since he arrived at the club, he's been so dominant from the penalty spot. He steps up and puts the first one wide. And you think, There we go.
Mark, if somebody asked me to put down three players from the selected teams that had to take penalties this weekend and said, pick a couple of boys who you are absolutely guarantee are going to score penalties, I think I would have lost every single one of them, because you're correct. Shields would be top of the list of nailed on humdingers. It's going to happen. This has been one of the strangest seasons for Linfield. Yes, they do have the League Cup final to look forward to. This European run has been a shadow which is hung high over the club. They are still in this title race, but it's hard to describe. This run against other top six teams, is it a confidence thing? Is it a stylistic thing? Because when you pit other top six teams against each other, in the league table, Linfield come out last. What is it about them that they can thump Portadown and Glenavon, but they just seem to settle for deadlock when it comes to the games against their other title rivals? They have had some big wins, I'm not denying that, but on the whole, they're not getting the same kind of results that other teams are.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. We've seen Linfield score 6 goals against Portadown and Glenavon recently. So the goals are there, but when they play against the other sides in the top six, they don't look like scoring goals. And, it was a well worked goal on Saturday, but they didn't create much, if anything, other than that. And that would be a concern. Now, you do have to say, look, they're absolutely still in this title race. And I think anyone who watches Irish League football, they say at the start of the season, if you finish above the Blues, you'll win the league. Now, it's an old cliche, but a lot of the time it's true. And if you were asking me right now who's going to win the league, I would probably still say Linfield, because they find a way, they know what to do, they've been there a million times before, so they always find a way. But having watched them a lot, they're not creating enough chances against their rivals at the top of the table. They don't look like creating. Now, there's maybe various different reasons for that, in terms of injuries and all of that. And Linfield have certainly been hit as much as anybody. Well, probably not as much as some clubs, but, important players have been out for a while. But when it gets to the business end of the season after the split, Linfield will have 5 games against those rivals. And if they're not scoring goals, let's remember what happened to Glentoran last season. You could be heading towards that split looking pretty, and it could go wrong very, very quickly. Now, I'm not saying that will necessarily happen to Linfield, but David Healy will know much better than I do that they have to start finding ways to cut through the other teams, because that's when it really matters. That's when Linfield come to the fore, in those final 5 games of the season. And at this moment in time, I wouldn't have huge confidence that Linfield could get the results that they're potentially going to need, because it isn't a 2-horse race. This is probably going to go to the wire, and there's going to be several clubs involved.
It is genuinely one of the most fascinating years, because the form Glentoran are in, all of a sudden, they do look like they could find themselves back in the mix. It's hard to talk about that, really, for me, until they do actually win all those games in hand. I feel like with Linfield, if you put any other team or any other shirt connected to their record, you would say, yeah, well, they're just set up against the bottom teams, and if they can't win the big ones, then you would discount them. But it is that brilliant record against the bottom six that has them there, and history clearly tells you they can do it. They've done it 4 or whatever it is of the past 5 years. They can do it, and perhaps it's just being able to limp through and get yourself in the Coliseum, in the race where it's up to you to finish it off. Because for every single one of these teams, the way the fixtures lie, it's pretty much in your own hands. If you win out, you'll be flying. And the team that's currently sitting on top, you say form goes out the window for some of these big cup games. Well, these two teams came in and showed why they are doing so well in the league. Cliftonville against Coleraine. This is one of the best matchups we have in this league. Another thriller, 2-2. It also goes down to penalties. If there's one man that did not buy a drink in North Belfast on Saturday night, It was Gartside in the Cliftonville goal. What a performance in the shootout from him. Not only did he save a number of them, they were brilliant saves. They were fantastic diving saves. He's the hero, and it's Cliftonville marching on after a 2-2 draw at Saltchute.
Yeah, and again, by all accounts, it was an incredible game. I think it's the third game in a row. It's been 2-2 between those two. Um, but yeah, Nathan Gartside's he's had an indifferent season, I would say. You know,
I don't think the Red fans know how. I don't think they've really settled because he came in and he had a few off games, tried to settle himself back in, but this is probably his best performance by a mile for Cliftonville.
yeah, and look, I think probably in the past sort of 6 weeks to a couple of months, you've seen a different Nathan Gartside. I think he's grown in confidence. I think he's now comfortable in his surroundings. And look, there's no doubting his ability. Nathan was very highly thought of at Watford, and he's been called up into the international seniors squad previously as well. So look, he certainly has ability, and it wasn't even just the penalty shootout on Saturday. Paddy McLaughlin made sure to mention he made one unbelievable save at 2-1 as well. And if that goes in, it's curtains. So he had an absolutely incredible afternoon. Um, and look, maybe that'll just help him grow completely. He'll feel comfortable at Cliftonville. And let's be honest, if there's one thing Cliftonville fans dream of, it's winning the Irish Cup, because I think everyone is sick, sore, and tired hearing about the last time they won it was 1979. I wasn't even alive the last time Cliftonville won the Irish Cup, which is incredible. And do you know what? I'll stick my neck out now. I think this is the year for Cliftonville.
They are the hottest team in the country, even with their own little blips along the way. They just seem to be on fire. But Coleraine were matched them in every way in that game, and they'll feel unlucky. We talked about the players that missed. Joe Gormley misses. Shevlin misses. Like, Joe Gormley is probably still flying out of the stadium. He hit it so high over the bar. Like, just a bizarre game listening back on the radio. And you talk about call-ups from Nathan Gartside. Cliftonville have a new player that has received an international call-up. Young 17-year-old starlet Sean Moore has been called up to the Republic of Ireland under-19s team. I'm sure that is disappointing if you are a Northern Ireland fan, but you also have to remember, as a Northern Ireland fan, if you are one, that just because you play for a youth team doesn't mean you're going to play for them forever.
Indeed. And look, listen,
We've seen this book play it out the other way.
we have, and look, Sean is 17 years old. He's in demand. He's in demand by clubs in England and Scotland. So why wouldn't he be in demand for the two countries he can play for? And it's his choice, whatever he wants to do. I don't think, as a Northern Ireland fan, I don't think it's a bad thing that Sean has been called into the under-19 training camp to play a couple of friendlies for the Republic of Ireland, because he should be allowed to make whatever choice he's more comfortable with. And if he doesn't experience both in games that aren't official international games, they're just friendlies, then he's not going to be able to make the proper choice. And, I would even say at 17, can he even really make that choice? I know Michael O'Neill certainly spoke for a long time about this in his first spell as international manager, that he thought too many young players were making the decision long before they had to. I just think if Sean experiences both setups, then he can make an informed decision. And he's perfectly within his rights to play for Northern Ireland or the Republic. So whatever he prefers to do, whatever he feels gives him the better opportunity, good luck to him.
Echo all those statements. I think many fans of this league, if you're a fan of Northern Ireland, you would love to see him progress so that he is playing for the national team. But, we have this open policy, and I think you've just got to look at someone and go, if that's what you want to do, you power on. And he's doing it from, he's been called up. Why not give it a go? It doesn't confirm him one way or the other. And perhaps that is exactly his dream. That's exactly what he wants to do. And Northern Ireland fans, that's just the way it is. You cannot tell anybody what to do here. But great news for him and his progression. Another big win for Rodney McAree in this brilliant bounce he's brought to Glentoran, taking care of business against Portadown 3-0. And I talked about goals and balls that were still rising. If there wasn't a net in the way, that Niall McGinn goal would have kept going and going and going. Smart speaker, show me a definition of top bins, because that's exactly what that goal was. A cracker.
Yeah, it was. It was a thing of beauty. It was, even the run before it and then just to execute it, it shouldn't be surprised because Niall McGinn certainly has that ability and that quality. And we've seen him score some massive goals down the years. That certainly wouldn't be up there in terms of massive goals, probably, but just it was a joy to watch. And that's the quality that Niall McGinn brings. It was a very shrewd signing in that we all know the ability. He will certainly add something to Glentoran on the pitch, but off the pitch, he's such a good guy. He's a proper professional, super fit. I don't think he's ever been any hassle in his career. He's just the ideal signing. And he came in with very little fanfare. He doesn't really go for all of that. I actually saw him his first two games. He missed a glorious chance on his debut against Larne. And he didn't let that bother him. I then saw him the next week at Newry. And obviously it was a very difficult pitch at Newry at that time. And he was brilliant on the ball. Every ball into the box was on the money. He scored a goal that got him off the mark at the Glens. I just think he's been a revelation so far. I wouldn't get massively carried away. It's maybe, 5 games he's played in. But things are starting to look positive for the Glens again. And I think most people, if they looked at it, you could have seen there wasn't a massive amount wrong. I kept hearing that the Glens had imploded again. I don't think it was ever the case of what had happened last season. I think it was purely down to confidence. And you've seen now that they're just throwing out wins. It looks effortless. You've got Jay Donnelly back in the goals again. And again, I go back to that game at Newry. He scored from 45 yards. Now, if that doesn't give you confidence, nothing will. And he's just continued to score goals since then. But I agree with what you said earlier on about the Glens, though. They've got a lot of games in hand. If they win those games in hand, everything looks great. But they have to win them.
See, I almost I almost can't talk about them. I promised to myself that I cannot say they're in the title race until they absolutely win those games, because they are 12 points off, but have 3 games in hand on Cliftonville. If they win those 3 games, then I'll start doing it. But but they looked like they could.
I will agree.
They looked like they could. That's the thing. That's the difference from maybe 3 weeks ago.
I think the big thing is, if you look at the league table right now and just look at the points, then you wouldn't necessarily say they're in the title race. But you can be assured that the other 5 clubs know that Glentoran are in this title race. They're looking over their shoulders, and that'll probably play a little part in things as well. Look, everything that Rodney McAree has done so far, it seems to have worked out for him. There's no reason why that can't keep going on. I don't think they're going to get it as easy as maybe they've had it in some of the games. There's going to be much bigger tests out there for them. But you have to say, on what has happened so far since Rodney has taken over, you have to say fair play, that they've done everything right. They've scored goals, they've got wins, confidence is flowing again. And then they have somebody like Conor McMenamin coming back. He come off the bench on Saturday. And if you have him coming in, I mean, things can only look good between now and the end of the season, you'd think.
It would be one of the most incredible stories to see Glentoran look like they've won the league in October, then go on this dreadful run where there's car park protests, as they say, they change manager, and then they go on it again, and somehow, because for that to happen, for Glentoran to win the league from where they are now, it would be a run of epic proportions, wouldn't it? The drama that would have to go down for that to be the case. But it's week by week, game by game, and you're right, other teams will not want to face them in the current form that they are in. And unlike a team maybe like a Crusaders or a Linfield who are sitting there going, I want to try and win but I want to lose, Glentoran could go into these games with nothing to lose, and that could make them even more dangerous.
Yeah, completely. And they're playing with that bit of freedom. You can see that. And then when you add in the quality they have, it's not a bad recipe. But I think the jury still has to be out in some shape or form because yes, they're in great form at the moment, but I can't see any of the top six putting together a ridiculous run and being unbeaten in the league from now to the end of the season. I just don't see it happening. I think the league's far too competitive, and if the Glens if the Glens can win the three games in hand and get themselves back in real touching distance by the time of the split, say, then absolutely they're in this title race. But if they maybe slip up in some of those games, it just might leave them too much to do. Because again, like I said, it's not going to be a two-horse race probably. So they would be relying on several teams slipping up, and that makes it much more difficult. But at this moment in time, why wouldn't they believe they have a chance? And I think when you watch them, they believe they have a chance. And that's maybe the first hurdle that they have because having watched them for probably for 2 months before they made the change, they didn't look like a group of players who genuinely believed that they could get back into the title race, and maybe they did privately, but just watching their performances, you couldn't see that.
We've all played five-a-side. There's a team that's 3-0 down. They've been awful for the past 30 minutes. And some boy says, lads, we've got 10 minutes to win this. And that's when they're most dangerous. And that's Glentoran. They're the 3-0 team down with 10 minutes to go, down at a six-a-side game somewhere else. Leaving that metaphor aside, going through the rest of the games that went down. Ballyclare win out against Institute, get to the quarterfinals. What a great run they've had. They win 1-0 against Institute. Ballymena take care of business against Newington 4-1 to tail off what's been a difficult couple of weeks for them. Crusaders knockout on Friday, the lowest ranked team in the competition up until then, against Bangor 2-1 there. A game that I was at, Knockbreda lose 2-1 against Dungannon Swifts. One of the cruelest defeats I have ever seen live. I cannot say this clearly enough. Knockbreda were immense. They were fantastic. They fought for every ball. Their defense were amazing. They stood up some amazing tackles. They were able to completely make Dungannon Swifts impotent up going forward. They had this game won, and the amount of chances that they were unlucky not to nail. If you're Anto Lagan, that shot that comes through, it comes to you in the 6-yard box, and you pump it over when it looks as though it could have been easier to fire it in the net. Oh, and then they give away a penalty to Dungannon in what was the 89th, 90th minute. It's scored by James Knowles to take it to what looks like it's going to be extra time. And then Dungannon pretty much go up the other end of the park in the middle of injury time, about a minute, 2 minutes later, and Padraig Lynch slams it home. A snatch and grab of the highest order.
Yeah.
And I'm so gutted for Knockbreda.
It seemed from afar, certainly it seemed so cruel. But by all accounts, I was listening to your updates when I was at Inver Park as well, in between talking to Liam Beckett. And, it seemed like they were going to, and I wouldn't even just say hang on, it seemed that they were going to get the result they deserved. But the problem is, once you open that door, and the one thing you can't afford to do is give away a penalty in the dying stages. I mean, it's awful for them, but it just in many ways it reminded me of the Irish Cup final last year as well. When you look at Ballymena conceding the goal in injury time at the end of 90 minutes, and then to do it again in injury time at the end of extra time. It's just the cruelest way to lose a game, and I'm sure it's knocked the stuffing out of Knockbreda. The cruelest way possible. That's more cruel than a penalty shootout to me.
It really, really is, because that burst to get the second goal, like Dungannon almost hadn't done that the entire game. Dungannon looked lifeless, but that's because Knockbreda were up for it. Like, I cannot tell you how many times where it looked as though Dungannon were going to march down, they were going to fire down the wing, and there was just a tackle or a push off the ball where the Knockbreda fans were just roaring. Just there were so many times where Knockbreda had that tackle and Dungannon just couldn't pull anything off. And what a story that would have been for Knockbreda to get into the last 8, but it wasn't to be the case. The only other team from the championship that got through was Harland and Wolf Welders, upsetting Glenavon. They've had a torrid start to the year, Glenavon. Harland Wolf Welders look like a completely different team under manager McKee. Probably could have saw it coming, but a brilliant result for the Welders.
Yeah, and look, the Welders have been on a great run, and that always helps. Glenavon's form has been indifferent. We're all aware of that. And again, that word momentum. The Welders had a bit of momentum going into the game. Now, I will say, I've only seen the goal from maybe 2 angles. To me, it looks a yard, if not 2 yards offside. I could certainly be corrected on that if someone has a better angle of it. That said, by all accounts, they certainly deserved their victory. Glenavon created chances. They missed their chances, which is a recurring theme. And I think, the Welders would have fancied their chances going to Mourneview on Saturday. Not just because of the form they were in, but the fact that anyone can see that Glenavon have a bit of a soft underbelly when it comes to games where they're expected to win. You see Glenavon all the time against, maybe Glentoran or Crusaders or Larne, and they really put it up to them. And they get wins. They've run Linfield close a couple of times this season as well at Windsor. But when they play teams that they're expected to beat, for whatever reason, they just don't look like they're going to win the game. And I don't know what the reason for that is. It must be a mentality thing because it's the same players that can beat Crusaders a few weeks ago. It's a difficult one for Gary Hamilton. I don't know how that sorts itself out. But you have to say, fair play to the Welders. They went there, they did what they had to do, and as usual with these things, of course, it's an ex-Glenavon player scores the winner.
Of course it is. One way that Gary is attempting to fix it is by grabbing the gauntlet like he's Thanos and saying, I'll do it myself. He's playing regularly, coming off the bench, and he's looking quite sharp, actually, when he's getting the ball. He was key in getting that goal against Carrick Rangers. It's strange, this Glenavon team, because they have such exciting youthful talent, and they have players with bags of Irish League experience, but that concoction just isn't creating consistent results or consistent play. It's one of the things that the chairman was talking about in the interview, that it's frustrating. The fans are frustrated that they can do it against the top teams, but they can't do it against the teams in the bottom 6. How do you square that circle? It's frustrating, no doubt.
I think the problem with that, again, is if you're going to bring players to the club that have the mentality of it doesn't matter who you're playing, you have to have that winning mentality, that ruthless streak. Those are the players that cost money. And that brings us back to the start of the conversation again. And that's why, unless Glenavon can bring in 4 or 5 of those types of players, if they could sign another 3 or 4 Jordan Stewarts until the end of the season, you'd see a completely different story. And that's going to be the issue for Gary. It's whether, I don't know how you change someone's mindset. I don't even necessarily say it's an attitude thing. I think it's a mindset. And, because I would never question the Glenavon players' attitudes. They were certainly trying to win the game. They created chances. Gary, at 42, comes off the bench, and I think he created 2 chances in 9 minutes. If you could play a game of football where you didn't have to run, Gary Hamilton would start every week. Because he's got all the ability in the world still in his head and in his feet, but his legs just don't work.
Oh, it's funny because go back to the interview, somewhat they say their strength of being this top part-time team, you could almost describe them as, is that they look at some players and some players actually want to be part-time. They have a career, they have a job that they're engaged with, and they like the idea of competing but not fully committing to a full-time future. And perhaps that's a bit of a hangover from the league over the past few years. Glenavon to be able to pick out the players, there's no doubt. We've all seen the youth players that have come through and are full-time players elsewhere, and they've been able to find the Peter Campbells, they've been able to get the best out of Fitzpatrick. Look at Isaac Bird, who didn't even get a sniff of the subs bench at Portadown, and he'd be one of the top contenders for one of the best youth players, and now they bring in what could be a spark to end their season. Jordan Stewart, officially, I'm going to say it now, the winner of the most ridiculous squad number sweepstakes of the January transfer window. He's going to be wearing 77. Of course he is. What a fantastic signing for them. And if there's a shop window you want to be in, Glenavon always seems to be the one what works out for people to show exactly what they can do.
Yeah, and I think Succa has probably looked at several players down the years, playing for Glenavon, getting their love for football back, enjoying football, playing with a smile on their face, showing their quality. And that's what Jordan needs to do. He's had horrendous luck with injuries. And I think going to Glenavon between now and the end of the season can only be good for him. And potentially, why can't Jordan Stewart light it up at Glenavon and go back to Linfield in the summer, completely refreshed, fully fit, and then Jordan Stewart starts next season with Linfield full of confidence. That's certainly the plan. That's what he wants to happen. And for Gary Hamilton, if he can get the best Jordan Stewart between now and the end of the season, everyone's a winner.
We want the cliche to be rolled out. Linfield fans want it to be, it feels like a brand new signing. That's what they want for it to be next season, off the back of a great potential Glenavon run. The quarterfinal draw is as follows. Crusaders will host Glentoran, cracking game. Cliftonville will host Dungannon Swifts, and then two draws that I absolutely love. This is what the Irish Cup is all about. Ballymena go to Ballyclare Comrades. They go there to Dixon Park, and that brand new shiny Blanchflower Stadium is going to host an Irish Cup quarterfinal when Larne go down to there. If I am not at a game, that is where I want to be. That is going to be pumping over in East Belfast for the Welders.
I totally agree with you, and I think the games at Ballyclare and the games at the Welders, as you say, that's the one. If we want to talk about cliches, the romance of the cup, that's the two you'll be looking for. And look, maybe Larne fans will have been cheering with delight when they got that draw. I think Tiernan Lynch will know exactly what they expect, and that certainly won't be any easy stretch for them. And the same with Ballymena, like David Jeffrey said in his interview with the in-house guys at Ballymena, that Ballyclare, when they got through against Institute, probably thought, we wouldn't mind Ballymena. And, that's the reality of it. And, Stephen Small seems to have done a very good job at Ballyclare. Full credit to him. And look, they will fancy their chances. Why not? Ballymena, if they can be professional, you would fancy them. Of course you would, because they do have a lot of quality, despite maybe people saying that they had to get rid of a few players this month. If we're all being honest, most of those players weren't really featuring for them anyway. So I don't think it's catastrophic by any stretch, but it's a very, very tough draw. And if you look at the other quarterfinals, it's a toss of a coin, isn't it? You can't predict, because Dungannon have shown something different since the turn of the year, maybe towards the end of last year. They've got players playing, they've got, they're scoring goals. You can see the confidence is high. And even to show that mental strength to come back last Saturday against Knockbreda, that wouldn't have been easy, because I'm sure most of those players thought they were heading out as well. So I think there's a lot to play for. That said, I mean, if we're being really honest, do we see Ballyclare or the Welders getting through to the semi-final? I personally don't. I think it might be glorious failure at the end of it, the quarterfinals, but I think we're going to have a bit of fun and games before it's over.
We charge towards this weekend fixtures, 2 on Friday, and of course, if you had to bet money who's playing on Friday, it's Larne, and they host the Mercurial Glenavon. Get right game for Glenavon, because Larne, as much as they've gotten the odd result, they'll be beaming after beating Linfield. They aren't scoring a lot of goals. Could Gary Hamilton be the man to fire in a rocket from 30 yards?
I think the ball would have to be played right onto his toe for him to do it, but I wouldn't put it past him at all. That said, I agree with you that Larne aren't scoring bucket loads of goals at the moment, but I have to say, the new signing they made in January, Andy Ryan, I was very impressed with him on Saturday. I thought his hold-up play was very, very good. He brought people into play. He quickly got in the box. He looks like he has an eye for goal as well. And a bit like maybe Niall McGinn or even Jay Donnelly, I think if he gets one goal, he could maybe go on a bit of a run. And look, Lee Bonus, I think he has answered a lot of people who thought he didn't have what it takes to go to the next level. I think he's showing constantly that his game is about more than goals. But he is scoring goals. He's scoring important goals. And I couldn't see anything really past a Larne victory when I look at it like that. But like we said about Glenavon, the mentality of their players, I think they'll go to Inver Park and fancy their chances. And, to me, they probably will look more convincing there than they did last Saturday.
Big game at the bottom of the table. Newry host Carrick. Newry get any kind of result, they'll feel a lot more comfortable when it comes to trying to get automatic survival, if you can call it that. These are the type of games they'll be circling in red and thinking, some points there, please.
Yeah, I mean, they'll look at that. That has to be the type of game they're winning. And I have to say, everything I've seen from Newry this season, I've been impressed by so much of it. I think there's so much more potential left in them, but sooner or later things have to click in a more consistent fashion. And I know Darren Mullen's certainly been frustrated a lot because he knows that their performances maybe have been better than their results. But a lot of managers can say that. I actually fancy Newry this weekend. I think they have something about them. They know they have to get points in this type of game. That said, Carrick have been a breath of fresh air this season as well. And they will certainly fancy their chances. But I just think the importance of the game, and Newry have been dealt a couple of blows in recent games. I can see them getting a victory in this one.
Another big game in what looks like a very tough task. Portadown go to Ballymena United. Portadown have got one of their few wins this season against Ballymena. It'll be a different test when they go up to the showgrounds to try and get something there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge game for Portadown. And, what Niall Curry is saying, he was certainly a lot more energized by their performance against the Glens, even though it didn't go their way. There was a lot of things that he liked about the performance. He could see what he was trying to do. And Ballymena, just sometimes you never quite know what you're getting. And again, Portadown, that's the sort of game they'll be looking at. That's the sort of game Niall Curry would have been targeting from the second he went into that job. And something has to turn for Portadown sooner rather than later. And why wouldn't it be this Saturday?
They are absolutely run out of games. What a story. If McElroy was the man to come on, because he was signed by them with a fee to come on, and that'll be paying back potentially if it all works out some of his fee there. Other big games, Crusaders host Dungannon in an absolute must win for Crusaders. They've always done well at Seaview, and you kind of feel as though that could be a very strong chance of them winning. And then two humdingers. Linfield host Cliftonville, Coleraine host Glentoran. Who is going to stand tall? It feels like one of these is going to be a draw, but a win for any of these teams would be a massive statement.
Yeah, and look, it'll be interesting to see how Coleraine react to the disappointment of last Saturday going out of the Cup. They're a hard team to score goals against. I think that's very clear. And if they'd played the Glens a few weeks ago, it would have been a different story. But, Glentoran are flying high. They're full of confidence. They're full of goals. Like I said, Conor McMenamin back. And of course, we don't have to go into too much, but he's got history at Coleraine from this season. If he gets the opportunity on the pitch, I'm sure he'll be wanting to make a statement or two. And listen, I wouldn't be surprised if the Glens continued their unbelievable run. As for the game at Windsor, I think it's a toss of a coin. If Linfield can get themselves in front, I think you've got a different game. But if Cliftonville can take the lead in that game, the Windsor crowd can be unforgiving. If they get on the Linfield players' backs or whatever, it could be a very long day for Linfield. But at this moment in time, if I was a betting man, I would bet on a draw at Windsor and Sam.
0-0 feels like history tells us this could be. Is this a must-win for Linfield? Genuinely, it sounds very over the top, but for all intents and purposes, if they do lose this game, that's a big swing in favour of Cliftonville.
Yeah, look, if they were to lose the game, it's certainly not good. There's no getting away from that. But I wouldn't say it's must-win at this stage. I think there's still so many games left. And like I said, I don't fancy any team to go on a massive run. So even if Linfield were to lose, I don't think it's catastrophic for them. But I think just to get the monkey off their back, to beat a team in the top six, maybe even score a couple of goals, then you could see maybe a Linfield Charge if they could do that.
A win for either of these teams, they will be dreaming of what the rest of the season could be. Mark, a delight, a pleasure. What incredible insight. I really enjoy talking to you every time I do. I really appreciate you making time to come on and chat to myself on the podcast. Where can people find musings like this on a weekly basis or even daily online?
Daily basis, certainly anything in the sun most days when I'm not trying to take a well-earned day off. And other than that, just any old nonsense on Twitter. You'll find me. It's at Mark J. McIntosh on Twitter. Photograph of me and my dog. Can't miss it.
Mark, chat to you soon.
Take care, mate.
Hey, could you tell? Did a bit of homework, did a bit of researching, jumping on the computer, tappy. Hey, bringing you more than just thoughts and feelings and adjectives about things. I know you like a few adjectives in there every once in a while, but this, I could bring some more to you maybe in the future. The problem is that would take a bit of work. Right, guys, follow me. You know the score here. It's at Kick a Match on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Come on, it's Monday. I need to watch the latest episode of The Last of Us. Isn't it amazing? And maybe when you finished watching a brilliant episode of The Last of Us, you can go, hey, Smart Seeker, please play Kicking Match, an Irish League podcast. We're returning to league fun this week. That means games in places you usually go and see them. If it wasn't in some place, you usually see them again. Sorry last week was so late, but I love his loads. He's like properly came for it. Usually when it's out that late, you know, he's like, oh flip, totally missed that, but he's went for it. This had to be a record Friday and Saturday listening for last week. Anyway, sorry, I've got TV to watch. Until next time, cheerio, goodbye. See you next week, friends. Peace.